Getting spirit fit here on the Unscripted Way Spiritual Boot Camp. Thanks for joining again. I hope you've enjoyed the prior episodes and those little nuggets of distinctions. I hope you're applying them in your life and that they're making a difference incrementally, or sometimes it can be transformational. So we talked about consciousness, we talked about, the voice in the head and you're out of your mind. And we talked about observation versus judgment. And today we're going to be talking about emotional suffering and the illusion of time. So we're getting a little, deep here with the idea of time and that it really doesn't exist, but why do we feel like it exists? What does it all mean? And how does it relate to suffering? So before we get into that, I want to take a step back and make sure that you're doing your assignments. So review the show notes from prior episodes. Try to keep up with us because each week we're building muscle in each of the distinctions that we're learning about, okay? So hopefully you have found it beneficial so far. This last episode, we talked about the distinction of what happened versus what we make it mean. So observation versus evaluation or applied judgment, the meaning making, right? So as you're building that muscle, hopefully you're seeing a shift in how you relate to your own experience and recognize all the meaning and the judgments that we apply to the people and the situations around us, including ourselves. So getting in touch with that voice in the head and noticing how much meaning it makes based on the beliefs that we're looking through versus looking at. And that when you start to build that muscle of looking at versus looking through, you're going from a conditioned or scripted way of living to a more conscious, unscripted way of living. You see where I came up with the name, the Unscripted Way? Because we're unshackling you from the limiting beliefs and wiring of the brain so that you can literally reshape how you think, how you move about your day, and the level of joy, clarity, compassion, and empowerment that you feel in every moment of life. All right, so today we're talking about emotional suffering. What is emotional suffering and how does it show up in your life? Well, there's a quote by Carl Jung that I love. And he's talking about emotions here. He says, emotion is the chief source of all becoming conscious. There can be no transforming of darkness into light and of apathy into movement without emotion. So we tend to try to dismiss our emotions or control our emotions. How about we navigate with our emotions, using them as information, using them to help be our GPS system to recognize when we're suffering, what needs aren't being met, what's the bigger context that we're moving through in life. And emotions are a vibration. So all emotions are vibrations. It's a current within us. It's like a GPS system to reconnect us with ourselves and what matters. If you're seeking clarity in your life, the first place to look is your emotions. How are you feeling? The more clear you get with that, the more clarity begins to emerge because you're honoring what matters to you. And we'll talk more about this as the program continues, so it may not be totally clear yet. So let's get into this idea of time first and its relationship with emotional suffering. So what is time? What does science say about this phenomenon of time, right? We often live with this past, present, and future concept. Did you know that science can't explain what time is? It's a dimension. Every other dimension goes off in each direction infinitely. Why would time be any different? And with every other dimension, we can go back and forth. Why would time be any different? So time is really, I see it like a movie reel, where it's a series of snapshots of present moment. This moment, this moment, this moment, and this moment. And then we're taking all those together, each little splice of these present moments, and we're weaving this movie reel. So then that gives us a past, a present, and a future. You follow? So is time continuous or is it discrete? Science has no explanation except that they only know there's this present moment. And is time even a universal constant? The answer is no. Time changes. The speed of time actually changes depending on where you are in the universe, and it's affected by even gravitational pulls. So time isn't even a constant, right? So it starts to change your relationship with how we even relate to time. We have things like clocks and watches, calendars to give us structure around this illusion of time, but it doesn't actually exist. Does time only go in one direction? Like we said, every other dimension goes off where you can traverse it from one side to the other. So is there really an arrow of time? And if there is a past and a future, where does time come from? Where does it really come from? Where is this present moment emerging from? Where did it go? There's no explanation. So you see, science has no idea what time is, except they do know that you can't have space without time. In this physical space, the space can exist, but it means nothing without the application of time. It's an intersection of space and time. What I'm hoping you begin to grapple with is, what is time? Is it real? And does time exist outside of the mind, or does the mind create time? Fair question, right? Does the mind create time, or does time exist outside of the mind? So once you begin to really question time, it helps us understand emotional suffering, because we begin to look at how we're feeling and whether we have a pull based on what we're feeling in the present moment, a pull to the past or to the future. And we'll explain that in a minute. In your life, when you think about where you might be suffering emotionally, how do you deal with it? Is it internal? Sometimes silence, numbness, depression, detachment, and anxiety can be forms of emotional suffering. For some people, we express it externally, so there might be irritation, frustration, anger. We know those people in our life that every day they're just kind of frustrated or irritated because there's some form of perhaps emotional suffering that's underneath all of that. So it begins to open up compassion for why they are the way they are. So emotional suffering can be latent or manifest, so dormant or right on the surface. And what is the impact to yourself and to those around you when there is emotional suffering? So it's an important concept, because to me, we need suffering until we don't need it anymore. So here's a quote that I wrote about emotional suffering. Suffering is not a natural state. It is a habitual state of unfulfillment. Let that sink in. Suffering is not a natural state. It is a habitual state of unfulfillment. This habitual state is a product of our thoughts. These thoughts are a product of our beliefs about the nature of reality. Many beliefs disempower us and deny the natural bliss of our divine, timeless existence. So I wrote that when I was reflecting on emotional suffering and how it shows up in my life. And I think we need suffering until we don't need it anymore, because it's a catalyst to change. So let's look at a model here that I often reference when I feel like I'm suffering emotionally in some way, that I'm feeling unfulfilled in the present moment. And I start saying things like, well, this shouldn't be happening. Should, remember, points to a belief. So what happens when the mind begins to see time as this construct of past, present, and future? What begins to happen is that when we're unfulfilled in the present moment, we need to look at, are we moving, does that voice in the head take us to the past or to the future? Let's say it takes us to the past. There may be some form of attachment that we have to something that happened that we're incomplete about. So there may be a non-forgiveness for something someone did, something someone said. It might have been, something minuscule and not that important, but we're still dragging it around. Or it could be some trauma that we experienced at some point in our life. There could be this attachment that we haven't let it go. So we're continuing to suffer in the present. This shouldn't be happening. And when we're in the past, it says, I wish that would or wouldn't have happened. So there's an incomplete that we're dragging around. It's a drain of energy in the present moment because we're living in the past. Literally living in the past, which really doesn't exist. It's a story that we keep telling ourselves, and that voice in the head is just continuing to reinforce that story. Sometimes we get pulled into the future. That's where often I live because I continually plan and I tend to worry about how things are going to unfold. So I play the what if game. Many of you might be part of this game too, the what if game. Like, if I do this, what's going to happen? What if I do this? Am I going to have enough money? So we tend to not take risks when we're playing this game, or we get stuck in analysis paralysis, or we expend so much energy thinking about the future that we're missing out in the beauty and the fulfillment that actually exists in the present moment, which we know is the only thing we have because past and future are really illusions. You see what I mean? So it becomes a drain when we're living in the future or living in the past. And this is where the voice in the head comes into the picture, that conditioned way of being. So when you're living in the future, it's living out of this uncertainty, and you're questioning, how will this turn out? So begin to orient yourself to where you often find that your energy is expended. Are you stuck in the past about, parents and what they said, what they didn't say, how they loved you, how they didn't love you, how that first relationship didn't work out, and you're still dragging around the resentments? Or are you so caught up in the future that hasn't even emerged yet that you're missing out on what's alive and in the present moment for you? Really simple model, right? So what we begin to notice is that time is this phenomenon that, from a spiritual perspective, we often refer to time as a construct here on earth that gives us a past, present, and future. Because with those three categories, there's learning and growth. We have a point A, a point B, and a point C. So it allows the mind to grow and evolve. That's the idea from a spiritual perspective, why there's time. It is a mental construct, and it's needed for learning and growth because we move from point A, point B, to point C. Does that make sense? So let's dive into this a little more, because I want you to begin connecting with where you spend most of your energy day to day. Are you living in the past? Are you living in the future? Or are you really grounded in the present moment? And that doesn't mean that we don't reflect on the past or plan for the future. Notice those are much more empowering. Reflecting on the past and planning for the future. That's when you use the mind versus the mind using you. Okay, you're using the mind and its collective information to go, what did I learn from that experience in the past? Let me question it. Let me understand the meaning making that I had applied and the judgments. Let me tease out what happened and the outcome. Let me pull apart my beliefs that I had in play there. So you begin to really understand your wiring in a very different way. And then you can plan your future by engaging the mind to say, okay, here's my vision. How am I going to get from where I am, point A, to point B? Very different way of moving, right? So it's an empowering way versus disempowering, where you're just giving your energy away to the past or to the future. So let's talk about it. In the present moment, you have an opportunity to be focused and grounded and allow feelings to emerge. I feel pretty at ease. I feel pretty uneasy, so it's probably taking me to the future, right? So let's say you feel uneasy and you're being pulled to the future. There's some expectation or fear. And when we say expectation, it's almost like an attachment to an outcome. Like, I hope this really works out. So fears, hopes, anxiety, unease, tension, stress, and worry. If you're feeling those things, step back and say, where is my mind taking me to the future? Why is it taking me to the future? What need, maybe of stability, of support, of clarity, is not being met where I'm in a state of fear or unease or worry? And now what strategies can I employ to feel less of that and bring me back to the present moment. So you're beginning to really orient yourself in the present moment and recognizing your relationship to the future. Similarly, when you're focused on what you're feeling in the present moment, you can then look at when you get pulled to the past. Attachment and non-forgiveness, remember? So if you're feeling things like regret, maybe you should have made a different choice. Notice the word should. It is what it is. If any of you have ever gone to therapy, right, that's one of the big things they always say. It is what it is. What they're talking about is all you have is this present moment and the situation as it is. You can't go back and change the past. So if you're feeling that regret, that disappointment, or the reminiscing where you get so caught up in how something used to be, like we were so in love and it was so perfect and now he just ignores me and there's no love and no passion. You're going back to reminiscing versus then connecting with the present and creating the future you want, inviting that in. Resentments, that's a big party for a lot of people. And resentments hold a ton of energy. So you're carrying that energy around in your day-to-day. It shows up in your energy field. So if we break it down energetically, all of this, low vibe. And that low vibe is in your energy field. Are you going to be able to manifest what you want in your life when you're carrying around sadness and bitterness and grievances? No, because all that energy is in your field. And then you wonder why you can't attract what you want from the future into your present. It's because there's no clarity in your field because we haven't done the work to work through all of these things that are incomplete. So by journaling that stream of consciousness, you'll start to see all of this garbage that we carry around from the past. And it's not to minimize it. There can be traumas in life. There can be unresolved things that we need to complete. So when I say garbage, I'm talking the energy of it. The emotional and the psychological processing, that can be a real thing because what we're exercising is the muscle of compassion and acceptance, non-attachment, creating intentions. So when we begin to move from a state of acceptance, that gives us full freedom in our lives because we're no longer defined by the past. We're no longer worried about the future and giving our energy away to past or future. We're totally empowered with the present. We can be very clear on where we're still working through some of these things from the past, but then it's compartmentalized and we can work on it versus working in it. It's not running the show. So again, you're moving it from being subject to all these things to holding it out as object and saying, wow, I'm really worried about next year because I really don't know what direction I want to go in. I need clarity. Do you see the difference where you connect with how you're feeling in the present moment, recognizing that's a future-based emotion, and then understanding the need behind it? I need clarity to help me feel less uneasy about 2018. What can I do to get more clarity? So it's a very empowering way of moving. So I hope this makes sense. This distinction here was so critical for me, not only to get past some of the things that I, went through in my journey. As many of you, we have all these bumps and these trials and tribulations in life. So the more clear we get about what energy we're dragging around from the past, or what energy we're pulling from the future that hasn't even emerged yet, it helps us really connect with our timeless needs that are underneath it all. The need to be seen, to be heard, to matter, for stability, for clarity, for ease, for connection, for completion, for forgiveness. All of these things are simply pointing to the humanness inside of us. So we don't have to discount it or dismiss it. We just have to recognize it and acknowledge it. So it becomes a beautiful way of moving with a sense of empowerment and grounding in the present moment. So when we talk about meditation, one of the beautiful things is, for those of you who have a problem connecting in the present moment, and again, meditation can be moving meditation, playing a sport, You're so immersed in the present moment, you don't have time to think about the past, because the minute you do, let's say you're playing tennis, you're going to miss the ball. And you can't be in the future. When you're immersed in a sport or music or even cooking, just whatever you love doing, you know that moment where you're just so zen, where you're nowhere but right here. That's what I'm talking about, is that magic, that alchemy of creative force that you have only available in the present moment. So it can be a moving meditation, but what that allows you to do is exercise that muscle of being in the present moment. And with meditation and journaling, then you're recognizing where your energy is getting depleted because of incompletes from the past. And that voice in the head will start spewing out all the things that it's dragging around. And these are often very unconscious things too. So journaling becomes a way to unearth all of that stream of consciousness. So I hope this makes sense. What it did for me was allow me to get out of my head all the things that I worry about in the future, and to create strategies where I plan to address where I might have anxiousness or fear about the future, to get really grounded with what meaning am I making about the uncertainty versus just what's so. So I'm not giving my energy away to tomorrow that hasn't even emerged, or the past, just right here, right now. So this week's assignment, carry forward any of the weekly exercises. And then I would love for you to continue watching the Spirit Science, check out the Untethered Soul book, keep working on that 100th birthday celebration speech. What are people saying about you? Then there's some prompts we're going to go through in a minute. And I'll have those posted because there's a series of questions. But the 5-minute journal entry I would love for you to focus on is beginning to recognize where you lean in your life day to day. Are you leaning towards the present? Does this take up most of your time, your, call it mind share? Or are you leaning towards the past? Or have you flexed that muscle enough to be pretty focused on the present and to create the future and to continue completing the past? Having them versus them having you. Okay, and that voice in the head is the access to that, along with feelings and emotions. So begin to notice where you lean, past or future. Notice your relationship to that voice in the head. That's going to give you a clue where you're going. And then begin to explore what beliefs are driving that attachment to the past or to the future. Listen to the words that you say: should, must, never, have to, always. Right? Those are key indicators that there's a belief, an assumption that we've taken as truth at play. So here are the questions. I'm going to rattle through these quickly. They'll be posted as well in the show notes. I want you to begin looking at emotional suffering in your life. Question 1. I know I'm emotionally suffering when, ... So what is your definition of suffering? We're all a little different. How do you feel when you're suffering? What are the indicators in your life that you're suffering in that moment? As we talked about, it could be latent or manifest. We all have different ways of expressing emotional suffering. If you're having a hard time connecting with how you express it, start noticing the people around you. Okay, and that might help you get a different perspective on yourself. Question 2, where in my life am I currently experiencing emotional suffering? So pick a situation alive for you today where there may be some emotional suffering, where you're not feeling totally grounded in the present moment. There's something that is unresolved from the past, or there's some expectation or fear around the future. And then we want to expand the perspective. What feelings do you experience related to the situation you selected? So start looking at the emotions, the feelings that are coming up around the situation. And now we're going to apply, from last episode, what happened versus what we made it mean. So question 4, here's my summary of what objectively happened in that situation. So what would we see on a video? If we were to play back, what would we see? What would we hear about that situation? Maybe there was a conflict, some interaction, some trauma. Start to decouple, distinguish what happened versus what you made it mean. So stick to what's objective and observable. This can be difficult, especially if it's a deeply emotionally charged event or trauma. Okay? What happened? Question 5, what am I making up about what happened or what might happen? What happened past, what might happen future? What is my inner dialogue? What am I assuming about the situation, myself, or the other person? So here we're taking accountability for our applied meaning making. You get how we just applied last week's distinction into emotional suffering. So we're beginning to decouple what happened versus what we made it mean. Question 6, in reflecting on my feelings, I recognize the following needs are satisfied or not satisfied. So I'll include a link of some of the basic human needs. There are hundreds of them. We typically don't even acknowledge that. So now we're coming back to these timeless needs that make us human. Question 7, I recognize I can make the following requests of myself or others to honor these needs. So now we're empowered to request the things we need to either complete the past or to plan for the future. Notice any strategies that bind your sense of fulfillment to external people, situations, or circumstances. So you don't want to give your power away. You want to be empowered. Nobody makes you feel a certain way. You allow them to make you feel a certain way. Right? So beginning to be accountable for your own emotions and feelings and reactions. So we're beginning to be more aware of our conditioning by reflecting on our relationship to time and suffering. So I hope in this episode it begins to illuminate the importance of emotions, the importance of changing our relationship to time, because really, scientifically, all that exists is this present moment. The mental construct of time gives us our narrative of the past and expectations of the future. So the key is to keep coming back to the present moment and noticing when we fall out of the present moment, where are we getting pulled and why? And if there's emotional suffering, that's when the mind takes us to one end or the other, because we don't want the present moment. We're saying this shouldn't be happening. We're arguing with reality. I mean, how absurd is that? So it is what it is. And if you can't accept what it is, there's something incomplete or there's something we're fearing about the future. So I hope this makes sense and that you're beginning to apply the combined distinctions week over week into feeling more empowered and grounded in the present moment to give you more joy, clarity, ease, peace, presence, vitality, and looking at yourself through the lens of consciousness, right? It's a spectrum of conditioned to conscious, to help you become very connected to the voice in the head and the limiting beliefs that are at play, that are shaping what that voice says to you. To begin looking at observation versus judgment, evaluation, meaning making, right? And now looking at time and how the mind uses time to generate suffering, the uneasiness of what's so. So there's no wrongness in this state of being if you're in the past or present or future. It's just information. It's all energy. So coming back to the energetic essence of reality is, what is this energy, this information telling me? That's all there is. So I hope this is useful. Check out the show notes for all the different activities that I hope you're engaging in to keep up with boot camp. Let's keep getting Spirit Fit together. And everyone, thank you so much for joining. Give me your questions, your comments. Let's have some fun together. And tell me what you're getting out of all of this. How are you applying it in your life? What are the breakthroughs that you're having as you're looking at these episodes? And I hope to hear from you soon, okay? You guys take care, be well, and remember, raise the vibe.